Hey everybody, it's me, Stephen, and I'm here to record a video for you that covers some of the material we talked about at our Imagine Incarnation workshop on November 18th. Some of you may have been at that workshop, and if so, it's great that you're watching this video again. But if you weren't at that workshop, this will help you know more about three potential uses that we are considering for the future of our campus. These are ideas that have come up so far in our conversation process, beginning last fall and continuing until now, that have come up from Incarnation parishioners. And we are now going to invite you to weigh in on each of these three possibilities for the future of our campus. So we're talking about three particular potential uses for our campus that have been suggested in our conversation so far. And those are additional meeting space, some sort of early childhood development program, a daycare or perhaps a preschool of some kind, and affordable housing. I'll talk about each of these ideas in this video, and then you'll be able to share your perspective in two ways. First, by filling out our online questionnaire, and second, by making your own possible model of a future Incarnation campus. And I'll say more about that model exercise a little later. But as far as the questionnaire goes, this is an online survey that complements the paper version of the questionnaire that people filled out in person at our workshop on November 18th. If you filled out one of those paper questionnaires earlier, that's fine. Please go ahead and also fill out the online one. We're tracking both of them separately, so your input will be counted in both. And it's also okay if your answers have changed in some way in between. Just go ahead and answer the online questionnaire honestly for where you are now. So we have three potential uses in what we think is increasing order of complexity and also increasing order of how much diversity of opinion there's going to be here at Incarnation in our congregation about each of these. Additional meeting space, early childhood development, affordable housing. Let's talk about each one. First, we'll talk about meeting space. One of the ideas that has come up over and over the course of our conversation process is that we could benefit at Incarnation perhaps from having some additional meeting spaces of a kind of middle size. Right now, we have one great big room that is Farlander Hall, which is really good for large whole congregation size meetings, not very good for small meetings. And we have a few rooms that are good for very small meetings. We have the library, we have the conference room and the church office, meeting spaces that are really good for a handful of people, only 8 or 10 or so. We have two meeting spaces really that are available for medium-sized groups. We have Short Hall, which can seat anywhere from a meeting of about 10 people to about 50. And then we have room 3, which is our godly playroom, which really isn't designed as an adult meeting room, but actually we do have groups like Education for Ministry that meet in there and make it work for about a dozen people or so. It's a little bit tight and a strange shape, but it does work. So we really could use, for our own programs here at the church, more mid-sized meeting spaces that are smaller than Farlander, bigger than room 3, that might suit about 10 to 50 people. These would also be very useful for other community groups. We right now host a 12-step meeting of some kind almost every night of the week, sometimes 2 different groups meeting in different spaces. We've also, one of the ideas that has come up a number of times through people's feedback is that it would be helpful to have meeting spaces that are accessible after hours without opening the entire campus. So meeting spaces that might have an exterior entrance so that groups like 12-step groups or other community nonprofit groups that use our space could access a meeting space and bathrooms without us having just to open the entire campus, without having sort of only one access for the entire campus. So a kind of staged entrance, if that makes sense. So something to consider. We might benefit from adding additional meeting space to our campus. The second use that we're going to consider is early childhood development. And we're using that term because we don't want to think just in terms of a preschool, because preschool tends to serve older children, 3 and 4 years old. We might be talking about a daycare that would serve infants and toddlers, or something that is a daycare and preschool. We could imagine a lot of different possibilities. So we're talking about early childhood in general. One of the reasons that this idea has come up so often, I think, over the course of our conversation process is that we're at church, and so we always are going to need child-friendly spaces for our own use. We need to have a nursery. We need to have Sunday school classrooms. And so with that in mind, there might be a kind of synergy, a kind of win-win situation, where if we're going to have those spaces anyway, that we're planning to use on Sundays, what happens to those spaces during the weekdays? maybe it would make sense to build spaces that would fit the requirements for a licensed care facility so that they could be used during the week by a daycare, by a preschool, and then by our church programs on Sundays. Some of you may remember that after the Tubbs fire, we actually hosted a family-run infant daycare in our nursery for a period of over a year, and they used that space during the week. Now, if we were to build space on our campus that is suitable for a licensed care facility, that doesn't necessarily mean that we would open our own Incarnation daycare, although we could. There are different models of how it might operate. We might choose to just partner with a provider that would be a tenant and that would pay us rent. We would be the landlord and we would rent the space to someone who would operate their daycare, their preschool in that space and pay us rent. We might choose, on the other hand, to hire a director who would hire faculty and do it under our own umbrella and have an Incarnation preschool that would be financially and organizationally part of the church. There might be some model in between where there's some church-affiliated group that still is separate from Incarnation institutionally, but we have a kind of common value system. Certainly, even if we were just renting to a tenant, we'd want to make sure that they have some common, substantial common values with us and that they're the right tenant for us. We don't have to make that decision right now. We are not deciding about whether to launch a preschool or whether to seek a tenant. The question we're talking about right now is whether to include this in the plan for our physical space in our future campus. But it does help to have kind of a basic theoretical planning scenario. And so our team from Siegel and Strain has worked with a kind of basic scenario, a kind of plausible model that we could imagine. And in that model, we might imagine creating space that would serve about 40 to 50 children. That would include 4 classrooms, 2 infant rooms, and 2 toddler rooms. And you can see on the graphic here, this is a floor plan, not one that would be necessarily on our future campus. This is an existing child development center in Berkeley. But this is the kind of floor plan that we might see where there are a couple of classrooms for each age group that then share some hall space, office space, bathroom space, and so on. That's early childhood education. And so we'll move on to the third potential added use, which is affordable housing. Now, I think affordable housing is going to be the most complex of these 3 issues, these 3 possible uses by far. And I think it's going to have the most diversity of perspectives in our congregation. There are going to be those who are going to be so excited about the idea of housing and doing something to address the housing crisis that they will be really excited about this idea. There are those in our congregation who really are not excited about the idea of any housing to our campus and who would be reluctant to support any of it on our campus. And I've heard from both folks, both kinds of folks already. And I also know that there are a lot of folks in between. So one of the first things to talk about is why would we consider affordable housing on our campus in the first place? And the first reason is that it has bubbled up consistently from parishioners over the course of this process since last fall. In the word cloud that our team, our Siegel and Strain team created and shared with us at our November workshop, I think housing was the 3rd largest word that appeared in the comments from folks from the previous workshop at the end of September. So this is an idea that a number of parishioners have had and keep having. The other reason to consider it, I think, is that there might be a possibility with housing, more so than these other 2 uses of meeting rooms and early childhood development. There might be the possibility of doing something that both aligns with our mission and also has a financial benefit to the congregation that would let us fulfill our mission in other ways. With meeting spaces, we might realize a small amount of rental income when we rent the spaces out to nonprofit groups, but it's not going to be a major producer of financial benefit to the church. It's going to be a modest one at most, but it would be something that would help us achieve our mission through having the meeting space and through hosting additional groups. With a preschool or daycare, we would certainly hope to realize some income if we were renting it to a tenant, or if we were operating our own preschool and of course didn't have to pay rent to ourselves, we might hope to realize some kind of profit from that. But it's also true that actually preschool is a kind of a dicey income proposition. And if we were to run it ourselves, of course, we'd be assuming that risk. In any case, the financial benefits of those first 2 uses would be modest to moderate. However, with affordable housing, there might be a possibility of some kind of benefit to the church, either through an upfront payment or through a kind of long-term benefit, or through having facilities built for us by a developer that might actually help us to realize our mission in other ways. And so I'd like to try to talk about not Not today that we should or shouldn't build affordable housing, because that's something we will discern together as a congregation, but why this is something that's worth our serious consideration. I talked about overlap between our mission and between a benefit to the church. In terms of our mission, we can talk about meeting a need that is consistently ranked as the #1 community need in Sonoma County. In the last several years, both Kaiser and Sutter Health organizations did studies of the greatest unmet societal health needs in Sonoma County. And both of those organizations ranked as first and foremost a housing shortage, the need for people in our county to be able to find places to live. We know that housing prices are incredibly high, and we know that there's a large number of people in our county who are unable to find places to live. There have been local and regional goals that have been set repeatedly and have been unmet in terms of adding new housing to our county. Santa Rosa has been put under a state mandate from the state of California to build about 4,600 new units of housing by the year 2031 in the city of Santa Rosa. And a unit of housing is basically an apartment or house of some kind. So a studio apartment or a 2-bedroom apartment or a 4-bedroom house, those all count as one unit of housing. Santa Rosa as a city has actually set a goal for itself that is even more ambitious than that. The city of Santa Rosa's goal is to create 7,000 new housing units downtown alone, so just in the downtown neighborhood by the year 2040. So the city of Santa Rosa has identified creating new housing as one of the top priorities for the city's vision of what's needed in our area. And they see downtown as an area that they want to make that happen. There is some housing being built. A number of us, as we drive around Santa Rosa and Sonoma County, we can see developments going up, like the new one at the Cannery Building by Railroad Square, other places around town. And so there is some housing that is actually getting into the pipeline. Right now, there's between 1,000 and 2,000 units that are currently somewhere in the development process. So there is some work towards meeting this need. But at the same time, we can say that it's below the goals and that there is still an unmet demand for housing, and in particular, affordable housing in Sonoma County. Any housing that we would build on our campus, of course, would be a tiny drop in that bucket. And so I think it's important to say that we at Incarnation don't have the means or the responsibility to solve the affordable housing crisis on our own. If we were to choose to do it, it would be because it would make a difference for the 30 to 50 people, perhaps, that we might help get sheltered, and because it would be something that we feel a call to do because of our sense of God's mission for us. I said earlier that there might be a financial benefit to the church if we were to pursue bringing affordable housing to our campus. Here's how that can work. There has been a movement over the last several years of churches in California and in other places to actually bring housing to their campuses. It's not uncommon that there are churches in metro areas that have underutilized land in cities. And so there have been a number of churches in the last several years that have partnered with housing developers to bring affordable housing to their campuses. Typically, this works through some form of ground lease. A ground lease is when you don't sell real estate, but rather lease it to a developer for a period of time, 50 years, 60 years, up to about 99 years. And the developer will then build a building on that land and have the right to operate that building, collect rent, and so on. So the long-term ownership stays with the church. But in the meantime, the developer assumes the risk and the opportunity of creating a housing property and managing it. Often these developers are nonprofits themselves. So rather than looking to make a profit for shareholders, their mission is to create affordable housing. And of course, they have to meet their expenses and break even and pay their staff. The way that they do that is often by making use of affordable housing tax credits that are available from the government. And the tax credit situation is very complex. There are different tax credits available for different kinds of housing. Some of them serve different groups and different populations, and we'll see more about that in a little bit. They might serve people at different percentages of median income. The common factor is that they are designed to provide housing for people that cannot afford housing at market rates. And that because of that, there are some tax incentives available that make these kinds of housing affordable for developers to build. In terms of the financial benefit to a congregation that does something like this, there are three ways it can really work. One is that a developer might make an upfront payment to a congregation. They might say, here is $1 million or $1.5 million or some figure of money that would be the payment of the ground lease, and that the church then can put towards its mission in other ways, perhaps through renovations or whatever the church is seeing as its need. There could be an ongoing revenue stream. So in some cases, a developer might say to a church, here is a payment of $60,000 a year or X number of dollars a year that will be the lease on the ground lease on that property. The other thing that happens sometimes is that churches will have facilities built for them as part of the building that is put up by a developer. And so we might see a ground floor that is church offices or a fellowship hall or church classrooms, and has apartments above it that are the housing development. One of the things we've learned in the research that we have tried to do about affordable housing is that there's kind of a sweet spot in terms of how big of a development is built. Most developers, it seems, are looking to build projects of about 50 units and up. However, sometimes they're able to make it pencil out to build 40 or so, or even as low as 35. From our team's perspective, as we've been doing this research, we've also felt that 50 units is already a lot and is probably the max that we could imagine on our campus. As I said before, people are going to be at all different places on this. And some people are not going to be comfortable with the idea of any housing on our campus. But even those that are excited about adding housing to our campus are probably going to start getting pretty itchy once we get over 50 units at the size of a building and a development that would require. So we're focusing our research on a smallish development of 35 to 50 units, 35 being kind of the minimum that seems to be viable from a developer's point of view, and 50 being about the maximum that we think is worth considering size-wise. As I said earlier, there are different populations that can be served by affordable housing. Some affordable housing is for seniors, for people over a certain age. Some might be for single parents with children. There's a classification called workforce housing, which is actually housing for people who are at a higher place in relation to the median income, but still who are employed in the locality, but who can't afford housing in the place where they live. We can think about lots of people that are in different industries, first responders, teachers, people in some healthcare professions. There are a lot of people that are employed full-time and earn what might be considered a living wage, except that it's actually not enough to afford a place to live in a high-cost county like ours. People with disabilities, families, former foster youth is one group of folks that benefit from specific affordable housing. There's a nonprofit here in Sonoma County, SAY, that does housing for young people emerging from foster care. Veterans, there are some veteran-specific housing developments and others. There are other possibilities for what kind of housing a developer and a congregation might choose to build. It's possible to imagine something that would be spiritually focused, a kind of intentional community where people might gather together around some kind of common life practices. It's possible to imagine a partnership with a local nonprofit. One of the things that I have wondered is there a possibility of reinventing our relationship with a group like the Living Room, which has such a strong history with Incarnation, and which now runs housing, transitional housing in a number of places around Santa Rosa. So there's the possibility of partnering with a local nonprofit that would run or provide services at a housing complex, perhaps, that might be located on our campus. It's good to dream big about these possibilities. And it's good to be thinking about which of them might feel, if any, that they align the most with our mission, with who we are as a congregation and who God is calling us to be and to serve. It's also a very complicated picture. And as I said, the finances can differ very drastically depending on what's available for particular populations. And so these are things that we should be dreaming about and also should be willing to hold loosely if this is a use that we want to explore on our campus. It can really help when thinking about things like this to have an example. And we've actually found one. Our team has learned that a church in Napa is just in the process of working with Burbank Housing, which many of us are familiar with, a nonprofit local housing developer based here in Santa Rosa. And Burbank is working with Napa Methodist Church to develop a complex of affordable housing on their campus in downtown Napa. They have a historic sanctuary, which is staying in place as the campus around it has its footprint changed. Burbank is working with this church to build a 46-unit project on a 1.2 acre site. So their entire site is 1.2 acres, a little smaller than our site, which is just shy of 2 acres. They're creating a mixture of 1, 2, and 3-bedroom apartments in what will end up being a 4-story building. That building will contain 5,700 square feet of new space for the church. So this is that third possible benefit that we talked about earlier, where they're building some program space that the church will use for offices and for fellowship hall use. We've also learned that the developer is making an upfront payment to the church, which it looks like the church is planning on using for renovations to their sanctuary. So that's that first of those 3 benefits, that they're taking that upfront payment and they're able to use that then for the other things that they want to do on other parts of their campus, in this case, for making renovations to their historic church space. I've just taken us through these 3 possible uses, and it's kind of a lot. But we have talked about meeting space, we've talked about early childhood development, and we've talked about affordable housing. I want to say one more thing about housing before we move on. One, and I said this already, but we cannot on our own solve the urgent need for housing in our county. And any housing that we might choose to put on our campus at Incarnation, if we go that route, would be a small drop in the bucket compared to the amount that's needed. I don't think that we have a moral obligation to build housing on our campus if that's not what our congregation discerns that we're called to. At the same time, it seems to me that if we do decide to build any housing on our campus, we can be sure that there will be a need for it and a demand for them. And it seems to me that if we can do it without detracting from the functionality and the beauty of our campus, that it's possible it might be a significant act of service to our community that would be in line with God's mission for us. We are a congregation that has long seen ourselves as a downtown congregation, a congregation that's in relationship with our neighbors in our neighborhood, and a congregation with a specific heart for people who are unhoused. We care for our unhoused neighbors every week at Sunday Open Table. And so if we do discern that we want to add housing to our campus, it would be in line with who we are and with God's mission for us. It also seems to me that if we do go that route, it will be one way to create some revenue that could be valuable for whatever other renovations we plan to do on our campus, for the replacement of Heavenly Treasures in the frame shop, for any improvements we might want to make to our historic church building, for offices and classrooms and so on. And otherwise, whatever we do as part of our Imagine Incarnation process, we'll have to fund entirely on our own. I said earlier that if we do housing, we would want to do it without detracting from the functionality and beauty of our campus. And I feel pretty committed to that part. And I think that most of us or all of us would agree. It's also true that what constitutes that is somewhat in the eye of the beholder. It might very well be possible to design some housing on some portion of our campus that would still leave us plenty of usable green space and all the gathering and meeting and office space we need, and that wouldn't overshadow our church building or detract from the streetscape. Personally, I have some optimism that that might be possible. Others, I think, will be more worried about those things. And part of that is what we need the design process for. But part of it is also what we need your input for. And so there are 2 ways that we're asking you now to share your input. First is to complete our online survey. This will ask you to share your perspective on the 3 uses I just described. And you can find that survey at this web link, tinyurl.com/Imagine Incarnation Survey. You can input that. There will also be a link put out in news and notes, and you can go to our survey and share your perspective. The other thing you can do is make your own campus model. Our Siegel and Strain team has created kits for us, which we used in person at the workshop on the 18th, and which you yourself can use. These kits are now available in Farlander Hall. If you go to Farlander Hall and look on the counter, you will see 3 campus model kits. Each one of them is a cardboard map of our campus and a brown paper bag. There's number 1, 2, and 3 that has all the pieces in it. Now, what are those pieces? Those pieces are little pieces of foam core labeled with different components of a future theoretical Incarnation campus, like fellowship hall, church office and administration, large meeting rooms, small meeting rooms, godly play and nursery, early childhood development classrooms, retail. Retail could include Heavenly Treasures in the Frame Shop, as we have now. It could include other retail. It also includes housing. And each of those little housing pieces represents 2 units. So there are 25 of those pieces in each kit, representing up to 50 units of housing that you could add or not add to our future campus. In each bag, there's a little plastic church, model to scale. And there's a little plastic model of the next door apartments that we don't own, that little inn holding that is not part of our campus, but that our campus is stretched around. And I'll say here that we have tried to make some inquiries about whether it's possible to purchase those apartments so that we could consider them as part of our campus plan. So far, we have not been able to find out any leads on that. And we're proceeding for this planning process as if we are not planning, as if we're thinking that we are probably not going to be able to do that, while we are still going to be making some overtures to the owners of those apartments to see if they would be interested in working with us on some kind of common plan, or on perhaps the church acquiring that property. But we don't think that's a given, and so we're not relying on that in our planning. And we'd like to invite you not to rely on that in your planning. We've also got a cute little tree that you can put where our oak tree is. And when you build your model, as I said, you can place these things on the campus, and they're available to you, and they are to scale. The idea is that you can include every element. You can put a preschool or daycare on the campus. You can put housing on the campus, up to 50 units. You can put meeting rooms in whatever configuration. You can stack them in multiple stories. You can also leave something off. It's up to you. These are all the blocks in their correct sizes. There are also paper elements for outdoor things. A labyrinth, if you want to add a labyrinth. Different kinds of parking layouts with different numbers of spaces, all to scale. And so you can include anything you want on your possible future campus map. When you do it, we would like you to take a picture and send it to generationalplan@incarnationsantarosa.org. And then, of course, please back up the kit again so somebody else can use it. Thank you so much for watching this, everybody. Please contact me at any point, or please contact our team at that email address at any point with questions. We really want to get as much participation as possible in our survey, and we'd love to see pictures of your campus models as you share your ideas about what our campus of the future might look like. Please pray for one another in this process. Please be open to the work of the Holy Spirit, which we hear best collectively through one another, through our collective wisdom as it bubbles up through all of us. And we'll stay in touch and more soon. Thank you so much, everybody. God bless you.